Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. It truly means a lot that you've taken a moment out of your day to join this conversation, because today we're diving into something incredibly important, something that can genuinely reshape the way you understand the aftermath of a relationship with a narcissist. Today, we're going to explore what happens on a psychological, emotional, and even spiritual level when a narcissist sees you fully, authentically, and beautifully unbothered by their new life, their new supply, and the performance they desperately hoped would break you. This topic isn't just powerful, it's liberating. And if you've ever felt trapped in their emotional maze, this understanding can change everything. So let's lean into this moment together, because what you're about to understand might be the exact piece of clarity you've been waiting for. I want you to imagine this clearly. The narcissist, after everything they've put you through, confidently expecting you to remain haunted by their presence, suddenly finding themselves stunned, truly stunned, by the sight of your peace. And that peace, that beautiful indifference, it becomes the one thing they absolutely cannot handle. Let's explore exactly why that happens, and what it reveals about you, about them, and about the profound shift that takes place when you reclaim your emotional freedom. When a narcissist ends a relationship or transitions into the discard phase, they operate with a strategy that is both calculated and cruel. They rely on a psychological script that is as predictable as it is manipulative. They expect you to react, deeply, painfully, and visibly. They expect you to spiral, to question, to mourn, to stalk their social media, to compare yourself to the new supply, and to drown yourself in doubts they planted long before the relationship ended. Their entire exit strategy is engineered around eliciting an emotional response from you, because that response functions as their fuel, their validation, and their reassurance that they still hold power over your heart and mind. This is the part most people never realize. They don't post those photos, those videos, or those moments of happiness with the new supply because they've suddenly become loving, attentive, or transformed. They post them with you in mind. They stage them with you in mind. They showcase them with the single intention of ensuring you see them. They imagine your reaction before they even hit upload. They craft an entire fantasy in their head about how devastated you will be, and in their world, that imagined devastation is crucial. It's the foundation of their grandiose belief that they are irreplaceable, unforgettable, and essential to your emotional stability. But here's where everything shifts: when you don't react. When the trap they spent so much time creating yields absolutely nothing. When you simply do not care. Your indifference is not passive, it is powerful. It shatters the reality they built. It disrupts the very script they rely on. It flips the dynamic upside down and forces them to confront something they spend their entire lives avoiding: their own insignificance. You see, narcissists live in a carefully constructed psychological bubble where they believe they are the center of everyone's emotional orbit. They don't just expect your reaction, they depend on it. The moment they realize you've stepped away from that orbit, they lose the gravitational pull they thought they had over you. And the shock of that is profound. It's disorienting, it's enraging, it's humiliating. Let's look deeper into this dynamic, because understanding it helps illuminate why your unbothered state is so triggering for them. When they posted those curated images of sunset dinners, romantic trips, weekend getaways, or public displays of affection they never offered you, they did so with the expectation that you'd be watching. They were rehearsing a fantasy where you fall apart. They imagined you crying to your friends, scrolling through their feed, comparing yourself, tormenting yourself, and wondering why you weren't enough. They wanted your pain to echo through your mind so loudly that you couldn't hear anything else. That pain, to them, is a resource. It feeds their ego. But when your reaction is nothing, when you don't check their profile, don't ask mutual friends, don't monitor their new life, don't show even the slightest sign of interest, they are forced to confront a terrifying truth. You don't need them. You're not watching. You're not hurting. You're not frozen in place. You are moving forward while they remain stuck in a loop of their own creation. This is the moment where their false superiority crumbles. Their shock intensifies because they truly believed they designed the perfect emotional trap. They insulted you, devalued you, triangulated you, withheld closure, and walked away with someone else, all with the assumption that their actions would leave you emotionally shattered. They thought the new supply would be a devastating blow, a symbol of your inadequacy, a confirmation of their upgrade. But instead, what happens is something they never saw coming. You see right through the illusion. You understand the dynamic. You recognize the truth behind the performance. And instead of envy, you feel gratitude that you're no longer trapped in that chaos. Many survivors describe the moment they first saw the new supply. Instead of heartbreak, they felt disbelief, like, "Are you serious? This cannot be real." But beneath that disbelief was clarity. The illusion crumbled. You could suddenly see the entire pattern for what it truly was: manipulation disguised as romance, performance disguised as happiness, chaos disguised as connection. You realized that the new supply wasn't receiving anything real. They were simply the next actor cast into the same role you once played, performing in a recycled script with a predictable ending. Your healing becomes the one outcome the narcissist never expected. Their entire emotional framework is designed around predictable responses: your sadness, your longing, your confusion, your need for closure. When none of that shows up, their world spirals. They cannot fathom that you've detached. They can't comprehend that someone they once controlled emotionally no longer responds to them. Your indifference isn't just confusing, it's threatening. It is a direct attack on the false reality they've spent years constructing. And here's where the deepest psychological aspect comes into play. Narcissists lack the emotional capacity to process your indifference. They don't understand autonomy. They don't understand emotional independence. They don't understand healing. They only understand ego, control, and supply. So when they see you calm, smiling, living your life, posting your own pictures, starting your own journey of growth, they cannot place it in any framework they recognize. To them, your peace is chaotic. Your silence is loud. Your distance is confrontational. Your happiness is an open wound. Your unbothered state forces them into an internal crisis. They begin asking themselves questions they're not psychologically equipped to answer. Why aren't you devastated? Why haven't you reached out? Why didn't you send that emotional message they were waiting for? Why aren't you fighting for their attention? Where is the drama they thrive on? Your lack of reaction collapses their sense of importance. It disrupts the covert contract they believed existed, one where they abandon you and you suffer accordingly. They thought discarding you confirmed their superiority. They thought flaunting the new supply would keep you emotionally attached. But when you break that unspoken contract, you're not just ignoring them, you're denying the narrative they built their identity around. And the fallout of that is intense. This is why, after realizing you're unbothered, they escalate. They post more. They exaggerate more. They perform harder. They look for ways, desperate, frantic ways, to force you back into emotional engagement. Suddenly, social media becomes flooded with pictures. Suddenly, the new supply is paraded like a trophy. Suddenly, everything becomes louder, brighter, more dramatic. Not because they're happy, but because they're panicking. They're trying to provoke you into breaking your silence. They need proof that they still matter. They need evidence that they still occupy space in your mind. And when none arrives, they begin recruiting flying monkeys to watch you, message you, follow you, report back to them. They need information now more than ever, because the idea that you've moved on without looking back is unbearable to them. The truth is this: your indifference destabilizes everything. It disrupts their dynamic with the new supply. It exposes the emptiness of their performance. It forces them into emotional chaos. And most importantly, it reveals the profound strength of your healing. The shift in power within the dynamic is subtle at first, almost invisible, but it creates a ripple that changes everything. When someone who has spent years being shaped by trauma begins to reclaim their emotional clarity, the entire relational landscape transforms. There's a new steadiness in the way you respond, a new understanding in the way you interpret their behavior, and this unsettles the narcissist at a level they can't articulate and can't ignore. But more importantly, it begins to reshape you. There's a growing awareness inside you that the unpredictability that once destabilized you is no longer a force that owns your nervous system. You're not reacting on autopilot anymore. You're observing, you're discerning, you're choosing your responses instead of being swept into them. And this shift marks the beginning of emotional liberation. Though at first, it doesn't feel like liberation. It feels like a quiet internal recalibration. In this new phase, you begin to notice patterns you once missed, how their tone changes when they sense a boundary forming, how their behavior swings depending on their need for validation, how their attempts at connection are less about mutual closeness and more about regulating their own fragile sense of power. You see the inconsistencies that used to confuse you, the contradictions that used to pull you into arguments you didn't want, and the emotional traps that used to drain you. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by them, you begin to feel strangely detached, not cold, not indifferent, just clear. And clarity is something the narcissist cannot control and cannot tolerate. This clarity leads you to understand something profound. The chaos wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was a structure, an emotional architecture created to keep you exhausted, unsure, and self-doubting. But when you see the structure, you can't be controlled by it anymore. The confusion dissolves. The panic in your body begins to loosen, and instead of reacting, you begin to pause. Even a 3-second pause is enough to interrupt the cycle that once defined the relationship. The narcissist feels this interruption as if a cord has been severed. They sense the emotional distance even when you're sitting right beside them. They feel the shift even when you say nothing. And because they experience relationships through control rather than connection, your calm becomes destabilizing. It reminds them that they don't own your emotional world the way they once believed. They start probing, pushing, testing. They want to know whether your clarity is permanent or just a temporary moment. They want to see if they can draw you back into the chaos that gave them power. But with every test, you grow stronger. Not because you're trying to win or trying to prove anything. You grow stronger because you're finally beginning to understand who you were before the trauma shaped your responses, who you became while surviving it, and who you're becoming now that awareness is taking root. You're not fighting them, you're reclaiming yourself. And this reclamation shows up in small ways at first. You respond with calm where you once reacted with fear. You choose silence where you once explained yourself endlessly. You maintain boundaries without apologizing for them. You no longer feel compelled to soothe their insecurity at the expense of your own well-being. You stop shrinking your emotions to protect theirs. And these subtle shifts create a quiet revolution inside you. You may still feel sadness, frustration, or loss, but the emotional gravity is different. The panic is gone. The shame is fading. The fog is lifting. And as that fog lifts, you realize just how much energy you spent trying to maintain stability in an environment designed to keep you unstable. You begin to question why you tolerated certain behaviors, why you believed certain lies, and why you accepted blame that was never yours to carry. And instead of turning those questions against yourself, you begin to use them to understand yourself. This new understanding is what terrifies the narcissist, because clarity dismantles their entire strategy. They can't argue with someone who isn't trying to defend themselves. They can't confuse someone who's grounded in their own reality. They can't intimidate someone who no longer fears their reactions. They can't manipulate someone who has learned to observe rather than absorb. That shift forces them to confront their own emotional emptiness, and they will do anything to avoid feeling it. At this stage, the narcissist often tries to intensify their attempts to regain power. They may escalate manipulation, switching rapidly between affection and cruelty, between self-pity and disdain. They may attempt to create crises, hoping stress will make you more vulnerable. They may recruit others to validate their narrative or to pressure you back into the old dynamic. They might suddenly make promises they never intended to keep, or claim to have had some profound realization about the relationship. But the more they try, the more evident their desperation becomes. You begin to see the tactics clearly, and with that clarity, the emotional pull that once bound you to them begins to dissolve. You realize that their behavior was never a reflection of your worth, your effort, or your love. It was a manifestation of their own fear, insecurity, and need for control. And that realization is both painful and freeing. Painful because you recognize how deeply you were entangled in someone else's emotional dysfunction. Freeing because you finally understand that you are not responsible for healing or holding together a person who refuses to confront their own reality. Your healing begins in the space created by this understanding. You start reclaiming parts of yourself you didn't even realize you had lost. Your intuition, your voice, your emotional stability, your sense of peace. You begin to reconnect with your own needs, values, and desires. You start imagining a life that isn't centered around managing someone else's reactions. You begin rediscovering joy in small moments, quiet mornings, honest conversations, simple pleasures, things that were overshadowed by the emotional turbulence you lived in for so long. This rediscovery doesn't mean everything is suddenly easy or painless. Healing from trauma is rarely neat. You may still feel grief, loneliness, or confusion. You may question your decisions or revisit old feelings. But the difference now is that you're not navigating these emotions through the lens of chaos. You're experiencing them through clarity. You're no longer fighting to survive. You're learning to live. And in that learning, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system begins to trust you again. The hypervigilance softens. The constant dread fades. The instinct to anticipate someone else's emotional state weakens. You begin to feel safe within yourself. And that internal safety becomes the foundation for everything that follows. As you move forward, you start to understand that healing isn't just about breaking away from what harmed you. It's about returning to yourself. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to fear unpredictability, before the trauma taught your body to see relationship as danger, before the narcissist distorted your sense of worth. And as you return to yourself, the emotional power they once held becomes irrelevant. This phase of healing invites you to build something new, something rooted in self-trust, emotional regulation, and genuine connection. You begin to choose relationships that feel reciprocal, interactions that feel safe, boundaries that protect your peace, and environments that support your growth. You learn to recognize red flags without explaining them away. You understand the difference between intensity and intimacy. You stop mistaking chaos for chemistry. And you no longer feel the need to prove your value to someone who refused to see it. This isn't just recovery, it's transformation. Because you're not going back to who you were before the trauma. You're becoming someone wiser, stronger, clearer, and more emotionally grounded than you've ever been. You're stepping into a version of yourself that understands love without losing identity, connection without losing boundaries, and compassion without surrendering your sanity. And even though the journey has been painful, complicated, and filled with moments that broke you open, it has also revealed something extraordinary. Your resilience, your depth, your capacity to grow, and your ability to reclaim your life even after years of uncertainty. This is where the healing becomes real. Not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of awareness, courage, and self-reclamation. And from this point forward, the story stops being about the narcissist's impact on your life. It becomes about your return to yourself, your reconstruction of safety, and your rebirth into emotional clarity. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If this message helped you understand your worth, your power, or your healing even a little bit more, make sure to hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps this community grow and reach people who feel alone in their journey. And if you're ready for more insights, tools, and guidance to help you reclaim your peace and rebuild your life with strength and clarity, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, stay grounded, and keep choosing yourself every single day.